Thank you. I think recognizing that we have bodies is very important. There was one of the earlier speakers referenced to Dogen, who says that we can get enlightened in this very body. It means we need to take care of this very body. And our body doesn't stop at the edge of our skin. Our body extends indefinitely into the world around us, as do our minds. I want to start by recalling a story about Lin Ji, Chan Master, who 1,200 years ago was invited before a group like this one and asked to respond to the question, why did Buddhism come from India to China? It's a question like the ones maybe we're asking here about Dharma Today. Why has Buddhism come to Europe, to Italy, to the United States? What's the point of it? And Lin Ji's response was, as soon as I open my mouth, I've made a mistake. And it's true. As soon as I open my mouth, I'm making a mistake. And yet, Lin Ji went on. And he says, but if I don't speak at all, it's like giving you a fishing net and sending you out onto the flats here in Venice and asking you to go fishing and catch fish if I don't give you the gong, the drawstring of the fishing net. A fishing net without the drawstring, you cannot catch a fish. And so he began to speak, and so we must speak. And I think we must not just speak, but to speak up and to speak out. It's not enough just to say our beliefs. It's not enough just to give the advantage of the scholarship that we had and the training that we've had. We must speak up and we must speak out. Later on, Lin Ji was asked another question, and that was, how do you approach going on to the Buddha way, the Buddha path? And he said, face the world, go crosswise. And I think that's also true. But we don't live in Lin Ji's world of 1,200 years ago. We live in a very, very different world than he did. I want to reference the past in a number of different ways, even though I'm speaking about the future. In Hawaii, we talk about time. The native Hawaiian way of speaking about time is that you don't go forward into time, you back your way into the future. That is, you go into the future backward, you go blind. We all go blind into the future. And the only way of knowing whether we can find our way home for an ocean-going people, really sailing into the unknown, where you don't have a destination already in mind, you better know how to get back home. And so you sail looking backward. So in a sense, we need to look back to our forebears. We need to look back across our lineages, to our ancestors, to keep on track, to make sure we don't lose our way as we back our way into the future that's being created by intelligent technology. 500 million years ago, in the geological eye blink of 10 to 20 million years, virtually all current animal phyla emerged out of a fertile soup of single-celled animals. They call this the Cambrian Explosion. And today we're undergoing a second Cambrian Explosion. Only this is not an organic evolutionary explosion. It's an evolutionary event that's being brought about by the merging of human carbon-based, purpose-generating intelligence and silicon-based computational intelligences. And it's this synthesis of human and artificial or machine intelligences that is fueling what's being heralded as the fourth industrial revolution. But this revolution is as metaphysical as it is industrial, and it's as social as it is informational. Those who are looking to the far scientific horizons have said with considerable justice that we need to be concerned. And the concern is the technological singularity, the point at which we somehow manage to create an artificial intelligence, a superintelligence that begins acting in its own interest, not in our human interests. And we should be concerned. And that's prudent. And virtually every one of the ethics guidelines and sets of principles that have been developed over the last 10 years or so, and there's many, many dozens of them, they all insist artificial intelligence, as we develop it, must remain human-centered and aligned with human values. And I think that's exactly the problem. We should be very, very concerned not about a superintelligence in the future, but in the current environment that we now find ourselves in, with the alignment of the synthesis of human and machine intelligences in alignment with current human values. That should worry us very deeply. We could take the example of what's going on in Ukraine. There are human values at play there. There are people pursuing their interests. There are people who are very, very diligently trying to enact, to put their values and their intentions into action. But we can also refer to something like climate change and ask about climate change. How did this come about? Well, we've known that for 50 years, the continuing to use fossil fuels that were driving the first and the second industrial revolutions over the last 200 years, that if we continue doing that, we will trigger irreversible damage to the planetary climate. We've known that for 50 years. Now, why haven't we done anything about it? Nothing consistent, nothing that's really got teeth. Why have we not mitigated the effects of climate change? I live in an island. We see it all the time with the sea level rising. It's because we have a conflict of values. It is not a technical problem. We know exactly what to do, and we've known for 50 years exactly what we need to do if we're going to stop the climate catastrophe from happening. And we have not done it because there's a conflict among economic, political, cultural, and environmental values. Climate change is not a technical problem, it's an ethical predicament. It's a quandary that we find ourselves in. And the only way that you can deal with predicaments is to resolve them by getting clarity about how things have gotten to be the way they are, and then to have the resolution, a new kind of commitment, a new constellation of values that will allow us to deal with this particular conflict and the trouble that it's causing. What I'd like to suggest is that the intelligence revolution is presenting us with a similar predicament. We're not being driven, however, toward a technological singularity, but an ethical singularity. And I would posit that ethics, very, very basically described, is the evaluative art of human course correction. It's the capacity for engaging in deliberation together about the nature of our values and our intentions and the means by which we're enacting them, and to ask questions very critically about whether or not we're doing the best that we could possibly do in terms of the means of enacting our values and the constellation of values that we've got. We need to get resolution about that. The ethical singularity is the point at which human course correction, the capacity for that, the opportunity space for human course correction collapses. The point at which, in Buddhist terms, we will not be able to escape our own karma any more than light has the possibility of escaping a cosmological black hole. And unfortunately, unlike with climate change, where we can look out over a period of perhaps a century before things get truly, truly bad on Earth, or maybe 50 years if you take the more recent estimates, I think these challenges that intelligent technology is forcing us to confront will take place over the matter of just the next couple of decades. So what I want to try to do today is to make a case for three things. One is to see that intelligent technology is both materially and karmically significant. Second, seeing that the attention economy that is emerging along with intelligent technology today, the new attention economy, is actually a threat to the free evolution of human consciousness. And then to suggest that our way out of this predicament that we're being forced to confront with intelligent technology is going to require ethical diversity, an ecology of ethical systems to be able to address it. And the case that I'm going to make rests on themes, insights that have been brought up by many of the other speakers. The most basic of those, and it's the basic Buddhist insight, is that all things arise interdependently. I would take a strong interpretation on that and state straight out that what that means is that there are no basic units of reality. There are none. That everything is relational. Relationality is more basic than things related. And that everything ultimately is only what it is, what it means for others. That each of us only is what we mean for others. It's a kind of a Western, English sort of interpretation of Fazang's notice of interdependence entails interpenetration. We are what we mean for one another. The second insight was that there are two types of time and two kinds of causality. One of them is the time that we're all familiar with. We're running late on sequential time. It's the time of linear causal events, sequences of causal events. But there's another kind of time, a non-linear time of karmic relations, a time of significant connections, not just sequential connections. And the Buddhist insight was, if you take that seriously, if everything arises interdependently, and if we've got both linear and non-linear types of time, then we live in a world in which the experiences that we have are a function of the consistencies in our own values and intentions and our enacting of those values and intentions. That shapes the opportunities and the outcomes of our experiences. In other words, how we enact our values and intentions elicits the worlds that we inhabit. And so, if we start to think about what's happening with intelligent technology today, one of the things that I think that we can make is a distinction to get clear that we're not talking about these tools that we have, the smartphones that we're all carrying around. Those are smart tools, but there's a difference between tools and technologies. Tools and technologies operate at different ontological levels. So a tool is it's a thing, it's an object, it's a created, localizable entity that you can use or you cannot use. I can choose to use a smartphone or to use a computer or not to use one. With respect to tools, we have exit rights. We don't have exit rights from technologies. Once the smartphone started scaling up and young people started using it to communicate with their friends, it became normative. Communication styles have changed, and we're all subject to that. Once it became possible to do your banking online through your cell phone and so on, that became normative. So technologies are not things. Technologies are relational complexes that are never value neutral. They are never value neutral. What they are doing is they are scaling up human values and human intentions. One of the clearest sort of evidence of this, I think, is what's happening with what's referred to as the attention economy. There's always been an attention economy in humanity, at least since maybe the cultural sort of explosion that took place somewhere between 50 and 90,000 years ago, when people started playing music, when they started wearing decorations, when they started having religious rituals. All of those are things that attract attention and hold attention, and bind people's attention together. Our cultures are a function of that. So the attention economy is not necessarily a bad thing. But maybe 150 years ago, we started to have a new type of attention economy. And it's an attention economy that's based on the mass advertising of goods and services in order to attract human attention, and in that process to directly generate revenue. That's a very different kind of attention economy with a very specific commercial interest. So that what happened when you start advertising, you start harvesting attention. So Tim Wu talks about the harvesting of human attention as part of this new attention economy. And that's the attention economy 1.0. And that's been around for a century and a half. But over the last generation, what's been emerging is an attention economy 2.0, based on this digital infrastructure of digital connectivity, the internet, as we talk about it. And what that has enabled is a really different system within which those of us who are making use of e-commerce, of digital search, digital commerce, the e-platforms of various kinds, social media, we're doing two jobs. We're performing two functions. One of those is as consumers of both physical and informational goods and services, but the other is as producers of the training data for machine intelligences that are being programmed to learn how best to attract and exploit our attention. That in other words, we live within a world now where the technologies that we participate in, because we don't build technologies, we build cell phones, we manufacture those. We manufacture electricity grids. We do not manufacture or use technologies. We participate in technologies. In the same way that ecological systems, emerge out of species relationships, but then start to constrain and inform and structure species relationships, technologies emerge out of our relational dynamics and then begin to condition our relational dynamics, conditioning our human-to-human and human-to-world relations. So instead of crude price signals that the old attention economy 1.0 operated on, the new attention economy 2.0 is working with highly granular data that allows commercial and political interests to draw on are records of our desires, records of our thoughts, records of our fears, records of our aspirations that are digitally recorded. It's sort of like our informational DNA that these machine intelligences are being able to use to predict and to produce our behaviors. And to give you a sense of just how granular that data is, just this year, humanity spent 1.25 billion hours online in the last year. It's an awful lot of time. The amount of data that is being generated today by humanity is sufficient to create a 10-hour high-definition video of every single person on the planet every day. We're generating enough new data every day to create a high-definition video of the history of the Earth that lasts as long as the history of the Earth. Now, if we draw back from this and say, what is the purpose, what is the point? On the one hand, you could say that this flow of attention, it's really this second Cambrian explosion of synthetic intelligences, that it's all about commercial interests. But I think that that's not sufficient. I think we need to pull back and get a bigger picture and see that it's not just commercial interests, it's also political interests that are at play. I think that we have something going on today that's not unlike what was happening in the late 19th and early 20th century with what was then called the Great Game, a competition among national, colonial, and imperial powers for land and labor. But what's going on now is a new Great Game. It's not a competition for land and labor, it's a competition for global attention share, for the capacity to attract attention for the purpose of shaping the dynamics of consciousness itself. Very often, this competition is framed in terms of a competition between something like different versions, an American, a European, a Chinese version of a good life in a smart society. With, on the one hand, you have the Western, European, and American competitors holding up sort of a democratic banner and saying it's all about freedom of choice. And the Chinese, maybe the Russians as the disruptors here, talking about the autocratic, control-oriented, control-valuing East. But that really doesn't capture what's going on either geopolitically or ethically. The AI arms race, and we can talk about it that way, is not about winning intel battles. It's really about colonizing hearts and minds, transforming human sentience and agency from the inside out. It's a very new phenomenon. The data that's carried digitally by our enticed flows of attention is a record of our choices, as I said earlier, our convictions, our desires, fears, joys, our sensual appetites. Everything about us is recorded in that way. And when you have sufficient data granularity, what that means is that you're able not just to predict where people will be when. In a study that was done in the UK before the pandemic, it was discovered that if you let somebody have 6 months of your data out of your cell phone GPS, they could predict with 85% accuracy where you would be for the 6 months into the future. We're neither as unusual in our habits as we might think we are, but the fact that an algorithmic system is able to predict that much about us also indicates it's capable of shaping our behaviors by feeding us selectively the data that an interest, commercial or political, would want. So the central appeal of the transformations that are being wrought by intelligent technology, basically it's almost frictionless freedom of choice. If you think about the amount of music that you can download now, the numbers of films, the museums that you can visit, the libraries that you can virtually browse through, it's an absolutely astonishing amount of freedom of choice with respect to our entertainment, with respect to learning, and so on. And certainly to live in a world with greater freedom of choice is much better than to live in a world with no choice. No objection to that. At the same time, however, this freedom of choice and the smart services that are mediating that, services for search, services for research, services for smart medical care and attention. One of the worries about those is that it's going to lead to human de-skilling. to an atrophy of human capacities for engaging in such intelligent human practices as remembering. It's a very basic human practice. In fact, you could argue that it's the most basic practice for life itself. That if you did not have a capacity at some even just basic chemical level, you would not know what was poison and what was food. You would not know what's harmful and what's productive. You would never be able to go from something like simple success conditions for survival to do what human beings have been very distinctively doing for at least the last 50 or 60,000 years. And that is not just surviving, not just achieving organic success, but cultural efflorescence. What we've been doing in the last 50 to 60,000 years is not just surviving by eating. We've created cuisine, the wonderful food of Venice, Italy, and China, and Thailand. It's not just making love, to have children and progeny. It's creating families. It's creating communities. So human beings have taken the basics through memory and remembering what we've done and improving on it continuously. Without memory, we are unable to improve our own conditions. Without memory, we're unable to engage in the Buddhist path of refining our attention, of refining our consciousness. It's not accidental that the term that's translated as mindfulness is remembering. It's remembrance. Without that, we cannot improvise, and we must improvise. So one of the problems with these technologies is that they give us an amazing ability to get what we want almost frictionlessly. Now, karmically, what that's about is very interesting because karma operates, as you all know, as a cycle. Our intentions and our values are enacted. We get a certain pattern of opportunity and outcomes as a result of that experientially. And somewhere down the line, we're given an opportunity to re-engage, to reenact those values, to consistently keep those intentions, and it ratchets down and you get a cycle going. And what's the cycle of getting what you want? To get better at getting what we want, we have to get better at wanting. That is, we have to feel that there's something missing in our lives. So to get better at wanting, we ultimately cannot want what we get. It's a cycle of dissatisfaction. The technologies that we've got are giving humanity tremendous control. As C3AI, one of the advancers of AI technology, claims, to solve previously unsolvable problems. True enough. To accelerate human knowledge acquisition and application. True enough. But control is a funny value. Because to get better at controlling our environment, we have to perceive our environment as being increasingly in need of control. It's the only way to get better at controlling our environment. And what that means is that ultimately we create the conditions for ourselves to live in lives in which we have increasingly great amounts of control over our environment, but also increasing threats for things going out of control, hence the need to exercise more control, and we end up living in the most controlled environments possible. And that's where we're heading. We're going in a direction, unless we change, of getting systems that will be so good at anticipating what we desire, what we want, what we need, that they will be provided without us even needing to ask for it. Our needs and our desires will be anticipated, and we will be given the opportunity to select which among the many options do we want to take. And I would posit that while freedom of attention is better than no freedom, freedom of choice is better than no freedom, it's not a very robust definition of freedom. That what Buddhism would suggest is that freedom of choice is minimal, but that what we're striving for is to be able to relate freely. It's about relating freely, which takes memory and attention and so on that we need. The karmic possibility is that intelligent technology will end up serving as karmic engines that will produce for each and every one of us experiential possibilities that will blur the line with virtual technology and hybrid technologies, where the real world between this actual reality and virtual reality, digital reality, the line between those will blur sufficiently to where we will always be able to be provided with experiences that we want, that we desire. We will not be permitted, given the opportunity, to make mistakes. And I would posit to you that none of us likes to make mistakes. But I know that for myself, when I've grown the most as a human being, as a father, as a husband, as a friend, is when I've really screwed up. When I've really screwed up and I've had to apologize, get down on my knees and beg for forgiveness, that's when you really learn something. And to be prevented from making mistakes is something we really want to worry about, and whether intelligent technology is oriented toward that or not. Because if we go down that path, we'll end up living in the equivalent of karmic cul-de-sac, karmic dead ends, where everything will be wonderful and beautiful, and we'll never listen to music we don't like, and we'll never see a film we don't like, and our clothes will be ordered online, and we'll come to the house and it will fit perfectly because our bodies have been mapped electronically, and everything will fit. It'll be like living in the world of the gods in Buddhist, early Buddhist cosmology, where everything is there, everything you could ever desire, there for the choosing. But the Buddha had to be born in the human realm to gain enlightenment and become a Buddha. You can't get enlightened in the Buddhist heavens. You can only get enlightened in this realm. And I think that there's a very important message for us in that. What we don't want to do is to trade off our most basic human right, our most basic sentient right, and that is the right to freedom of attention. We have a global economic system that is based on attracting and exploiting our human attention. We are at risk of trading away our exit rights from that system. We need to change the direction in which these technologies are being developed. Because if we don't, we'll lose our freedom of attention. And if we lose freedom of attention, we'll lose our freedom of intention. And if we lose freedom of intention, there will be no possible human course correction. It will be decided by these synthetic agencies that we are now in the process of deploying. To see our most likely smart futures, we really only need to extrapolate from our collective failures to halt climate disruption, to end domestic violence, to provide adequate food to everybody on the planet, to stop armed warfare. We'll just keep scaling up the values that inform those. It is not because we don't have enough food on the planet that people go hungry. 800 million people on this planet today do not have adequate nutrition. And that's not just about going to bed with your stomach empty and growling 1 or 2 nights. It's about a generation being deprived of the basic nutrition that they need in order for the brain to develop normally. What we are doing is we're creating the conditions globally for an underclass of people who, for no reason of their own, are prevented from having their brains develop sufficiently to participate in the kind of complex societies that we live in. These failures are not technical, they're ethical. And realizing the benign promise of the intelligent revolution while avoiding its perils is going to require resolving all the values conflicts that these types of situations that I've just described, these things that we should really be ashamed of as humans. It's shameful that in the 21st century, people are going to sleep hungry at mass scale. Now, most AI ethics standards and guidelines address the risks of intelligent technology by talking about accidents of design and misuse by design, and that's important. You got your bad actors, and you got your algorithmic systems in the United States that do recommendations for parole and sentencing in the legal system, and they're based on historical data. And so what do? They start to create conditions within which communities are held captive by the past karma of their communities, not allowed to freely exit those systems. So those are real worries. But those are tool risks. Technological risks are structural. Technological risks are relational risks. And so what we need to do is to look at what kinds of values are we enacting and how are those shaping the ways in which our relational dynamics are developing? How are they shaping what we mean for each other? Because if they shape what we mean for each other, they're shaping who we are. It's an ontological transformation that will be taking place, not just a commercial one. We will be changed fundamentally in that process. So do we go to Buddhism as the ethical, line of last resort and say Buddhism has the answers for us? And I'd say no, unfortunately not. Every ethical system has blind spots. Anyone who's taught intro ethics, to undergraduates, that's what you do. You lay out, the virtue ethical system, and then you poke the holes in it and say, well, that's exactly why you have a utilitarian system, or why you have a duty-based system, a deontological system, or why, take it a step further, why we need feminist ethics or care ethics. Every ethical system has blind spots. So what we need is not a new species of ethics to deal with the intelligent revolution. What we need is an ethical ecology where the different ethical systems are brought together to deliberate on how humans should change the course of the attention economy and of the emergence and evolution of intelligent technology along with we humans. The ecology that's developing, how do we want to inflect those evolutionary dynamics? And it's based on this notion of diversity, where diversity is not a numbers game. It's not about how many different cultures participate in this, how many different ethical traditions participate. What matters is the degree to which the differences, the ethical differences and cultural differences, are engaged as the basis of mutual contribution to sustainably shared flourishing. Diversity in that sense is a relational achievement. It's a particular quality of relational dynamics that occurs when we don't just make the assertion according to the politics of recognition and the politics of respect and say, I get to differ from you and you need to respect me for that. It's having the extra kicker and saying, yes, I get to differ from you. I have a right to do so, but I also have an obligation to differ for you in ways that you value. And I think that if we can bring together a truly intercultural, international, and intergenerational discussion, ethically based, that we can begin to make some movement in shaping our futures, realizing technologies, an intelligent technology and a human technology world relation that is based on supporting rather than supplanting intelligent human practices like remembering and researching and parenting and healing and governing, and go down the list. A system that's based on fostering concentration rather than distraction, on promoting commitment rather than convenience, and on realizing environments that are conducive to the effortful cultivation of appreciative and contributory virtuosity, not the effortless exercise of freedoms of choice. That it needs to be conditions within which it's an environment where we're given not just the capacity for, but to the conditions within which we'll develop commitments to engaging in the effortful work of developing our own contributory and appreciative virtuosity. To do that, to realize that kind of shared future, we're not going to be able to continue being humans the way we've been human. We're going to have to take some responsibility for our continued evolution, to change the course of what's been going on for the last 50 to 90,000 years in cultural evolution and take it to another level. We're going to have to transform our consciousness and keep it from becoming colonized. It's going to mean aligning intelligent technology with perfecting our human capacities for and our commitments to being present with the generosity, with the moral clarity, with the patience, with the valiant energy, with the attentive mastery, and with the wisdom to be able to engage in any given situation in a way that would change the relational dynamics in a more liberating direction. We will have to enact our capacities for being bodhisattvas. We'll have to be Dr. Bodhisattvas and bureaucrat bodhisattvas, and maybe even general in the military bodhisattvas. At every step and every position within our communities and our societies, there are opportunities to live as bodhisattvas, to demonstrate moral clarity, to demonstrate generosity, to demonstrate valiant attention and effort, courageous effort. We need that, and we need it not just once in a while, we need it consistently. I like to play with the terms in Buddhism to make a distinction between living up to being a virtuous person and being a virtuoso. It's the term kushala that often gets translated as wholesome or skillful and contrasted with akushala, that which is not wholesome, not skillful. In fact, the word kushala grammatically serves as a superlative. So it doesn't mean doing things well. It means doing things excellently, superlatively. So the contrast in Buddhist ethics, I think, is not between doing good and avoiding the bad. It's between looking at what's already recognized as bad, what's being recognized as mediocre, and what's being recognized as good, and going beyond all of them. Going in the direction of superlative relational dynamics. And what does that mean? Well, take music, for example. I play some improvisational guitar, and I can look back on the history of jazz and improvisational music and say, I've got this history of the last 50, 60 years in the US of jazz music, and I've got to be able to understand all of what's been going on with that, because every new musician, a John Coltrane, a Miles Davis, a Jim Holland guitar, they all set standards for virtuosity. And if you want to be a virtuoso jazz musician, you've got to go beyond all of those. What you've got to do is you have a community that's determining what the standards of excellence are, and within that community, exceeding those standards. So each of us, whether we're teachers, whether we're business people, whether we're in the military, whether we're government people, each of us within our own community knows what the existing standards are, and our job ethically, from a Buddhist perspective, is to exceed those standards, to lead superlative lives within those environments that we're a part of. In other words, ethics is not about finding the true answer. It's not about discovering the principles that we live according to. It's by taking all the principles that we live according to now and finding better ones. 100 years ago, if we were having this discussion, we would not look out of a room with all the women that are here. It wouldn't have happened. Maybe 100 years. Go back 150. It wouldn't have happened. That's a really wonderful thing that we've, as human beings, realized. The capacity for engaging in these kinds of conversations is not limited to the people with a certain kind of body. Everybody's capable of doing that. And what I think by necessity we will need to do is to go beyond all of our prejudices, whether it's about gender, whether it's about culture, whether it's about political systems, to challenge them critically at the roots, but then to exercise our capacity, our freedoms of attention that we continue to have, to engage in freely deciding which values do we really want to live according to. Is choice a sufficient definition of freedom or not? How do we understand a concept like equity or diversity? In the United States, you have diversity initiatives on every college campus, and it's a numbers game. How many students with one color face get in the classroom versus another color face? That's not diversity as I just defined it. But equity is not equality of opportunity. Equity is quality of inclusion. And do you ever get to the end of quality of inclusion? You don't. So the Bodhisattva Path, quite famously, was referred to as a path of infinite activity, infinite effort. How many sentient beings are there? An infinite number. And as bodhisattvas, we vow to save them all. How many kinds of suffering are there? It's an infinite amount of kinds of suffering. How many of them do we vow to alleviate? All of them. We're on an infinite path. And that's a beautiful thing, as long as we go together and exercise our shared intelligence in order to create the conditions of continued superlative development of our capacities as human beings for both creativity and compassion. Thank you very much.
Grazie mille anche a professore.
Thank you very much to Professor Hershock for this reminding us of the liberty of mistakes, of choices of attention and intention, the courage. And we also talked about the infinite as the infinite path.
Continuiamo appunto questo.
Now, we're going to continue with this intertwined thought, and we're going to continue with the questions and answer. As you know, at the end of the panel, we are going to have some questions and answers with our speakers. Something is coming up.
Volevo fare una domanda, una riflessione col
I'd like to ask a question to Professor Hershock. First of all, thank you for your speech, because you talked about a crucial point when in the introduction of this conference I said that the risk of Buddhism is to go, through the West and go through something that kills everything, including silence, including the capacity of concentrating, because I want to say what you were adding, the neural circuits that preside over selective attention is what inhibits emotional attention. So not having so much attention capacity is producing a lot of emotional fragility around. People are not able to shift their focus anymore. People are distracted every 7 to 8 seconds, and if there is not someone who distracts us, we are looking for distraction, because there is also dopaminergic theme, etc. So the question is, I'm asking you a reflection, but to all the room as well. Are we not maybe going towards times where the practice of Buddhism will allow us only to talk about philosophy, preserve some kind of ethical behavior, but will not allow us to have spiritual realizations? Because either we have a strong concentrative base if we listen to the teachings of Buddha, so we place our mind on an object of observation that is stable. Otherwise, this is a reflection I'm sort of throwing in the room. Maybe we will only be able to be good people, nothing more, nothing less. Thank you.
I'm not sure that being good people is I think that's something we can all strive for, but what I was advocating for is to be better people. Not just good people, but better people. I do think that we live in a world where something like basic meditation practices of various kinds will serve as our best prophylactic against being infected by the systems that are at play around us. I've been asked at different talks, if you could make one recommendation of what you would do in the world, what would you change? And I'd say I'd make sure that every child in preschool and elementary school learns how to do basic mindfulness practice. Just to be able to pay attention to what's going on, to pull back, recognize what's happening, and create a calm mind. One of the previous speakers mentioned Juri. And Juri made it clear that while this calming meditation is one part of the Buddhist path, getting your mind calm and clear, the other part of it is insight, being insight into the way in which things are interdependent. One of the questions from the last session was, well, what about the kinds of interdependence that we've got now? A lot of suffering being caused as a result of that. And insight meditation would be meditating in such a way that you become aware of your own implication within these systems of conflicted or trouble or suffering causing interdependence. So we need both of those. Otherwise, Zizek is probably right. If you're only engaging in the kind of meditation that allows you to remain calm in the world, even though it's going to hell all around you, then that's personal salvation, perhaps. That's like going on a digital retreat and turning off your cell phone and saying, I'm not going to get caught by it any longer. It's good for you individually, but it's not going to change society. So I think Juri said that calming meditation and insight meditation are like the two wings of a bird. Can't fly with just one. Two wheels of a two-wheeled cart, it won't move with just one wheel. We need both. And so when people ask me, well, isn't meditation all about just having some spiritual insight and it's all interior to you? And I say, well, maybe there's some people who meditate that way. But my teachers have told me, if you're really meditating well, what you become aware of is how deeply imbricated you are within all the relational dynamics around you. Meditation is about understanding how we're integrated with everything else that's going on around us, realizing that and being fully aware of the conflicts, trouble, and the suffering in it, and then to be able to engage in doing something about it. So I think it's our best chance is to be able to do that, to take advantage of all the kinds of learning and knowledge that we have available to us. But I think if we don't have freedom of attention, we won't have the freedom of intention necessary in order to shift global dynamics in a way that's, let's just say, truly humane, which I think is basic.
Grazie. Ci sono altre domande sempre dal pubblico?
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, no? Yes. Please. You got the microphone?
I have Professor Hershock. Yeah. One is, I may ask whether the compartmentalization that you have in the US systems, not only just one system, all systems, you mean economy, as much as political systems, etc., is deriving from this kind of tendency that you getting used to get what you want. And so you don't want to be disappointed anymore by someone who has a completely different idea compared to you, and you don't want to confront with this because you are not able to face the disappointment anymore. So this is one question. The second one is, I don't know if I have understood correctly what you were saying, but probably I'm wrong, but you were saying that better is better than good. But at least in Italy, we have a saying that goes just in the opposite direction. Better is enemy of the good. So the problem that I find here in saying that better is better than good is that our society is definitely a very competitive one, and not only competitive one, it makes us introject a lot of value systems, so that if you really think that you have to go for that kind of model, you introject them and you generally get depressed because you are unable to go to that kind of level. And they say, there are some works by some psychologists who are saying that nowadays in nowadays countries, there will be a much stronger tendency toward depression compared to the past, exactly because of this, because depression is a kind of sickness of the people who are unable to do something. So what could you answer to this? Thank you.
Yeah, on the first point, I don't think it's just in the United States that these new communication systems are sort of fomenting populism and divisiveness. They've been talked about for a long time as kind of living in your filter bubble. And I think that that's not just an American phenomenon, it's happening everywhere. The scarier thing about it is that it's being now curated by commercial interests and by government interests. So you've probably heard about the social credit system in China that they're experimenting with. It's a very explicit Chinese PRC government effort to create good citizens. And they take responsibility for choosing and deciding what a good citizen consists in. And I think that there are frightening prospects there. But I'm not sure that the free-for-all that we have in the US of divisiveness is a better prospect. So I think between the two, it's like the old Iliad and the Odyssey, and you have Scylla on one side and Charybdis on the other. Which one do you take? It's a bad choice either way, and we somehow want to navigate between those two. The question, I think, between better and good, I would phrase it this way. There's talk about success conditions and improvement conditions. And all I was trying to get at with that difference was, rather than simply having success conditions, we need to operate more frequently with improvement conditions, more than we've been doing. And the reason I say that is because predefined goods are based on our existing sets of values and interests. our existing ways in which we've been enacting those values and interests, and we're not there yet. We've got lots of conflict, we've got lots of trouble, lots of suffering. So something's not right in our complexion of values that we need to change. We need to change our course as human beings, as individuals, but also as societies. So whatever the predefined ideas about the good, democracy is a good, political system, well, maybe it's better than some, but it clearly is not doing all that we need to have done. So what I want to suggest then is just that we want to move away from this idea of predefined notions of what we're striving for, and instead saying we're striving to continually go beyond all the good things that we get, with the possibility that we might improve along one direction and realize that we've got to backtrack some and start in a new direction. We really need to be open to what improvement means, not just success. I'm with you totally on the idea of people being psychologically burdened by the idea of improving themselves or measuring up to some high standard and exceeding that standard. My God, what's the worst thing for young teenage girls than to see everybody else having fun with the body that everybody's to die for and with the latest clothes? And I mean, it's disastrous for young people growing up. We don't want that. That's not what we're talking about. So for me, I think it's really important that the first of the 6 paramitas is generosity. The path that we should be perfecting at the most basic level of improvement, perfecting our generosity. And what that means is figuring out who I am in the situation that I'm in and what I can do generously toward others that they value and to get that loop going. And people often ask me, well, what are you doing? I say, well, quite honestly, I write lots of books and I don't think anybody reads them, but I cook dinners. And every time I've cooked a dinner, people walk away smiling and happy. So when I run summer programs in Hawaii and we'll have academics, like maybe this is a little too big for me, but I've cooked for up to 50 people, a 5-course dinner and hosted the people at my house and they're happy. So I think that's something I can do. I can open my home, I can use my skills at cooking and be generous in that way. Other people have other talents. It's all of us trying to figure out what is something that we can do for others that they appreciate and benefit from, and to start from there. And if we had young people who were oriented in that direction, rather than measuring up to some standard of successful presence as a teenager, I think we'd be better off for it. Thanks.